Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us in the world. And welcome to the very first episode of the L&D Fix for 2026. We're kicking off the year with an exciting start, and we are joined by Fred Thompson. Fred, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to have you. Good to have you. The opposite way around, isn't it? Is it good to be here, Tom? That's a good start to our webinar today. But yes, no, looking forward to this. It's going to be good. The report has got some interesting elements in it. I think it's going to be a great discussion.
Absolutely. And that is what we're going to be discussing today between the two of us and, of course, with all of you. First State of L&D for Small and Medium Businesses 2026. The survey was obviously done at the tail end of last year. A lot of work's been put in behind the scenes to analyse the data and really draw out what I think are some really not just interesting insights. Like, every report is interesting, but what really struck me when we were going through this together is the practical application that can be drawn from these points, and that's really what we want to discuss with all of you today. Do jump into the comments and let us know where you're joining from yet, and of course, if you've had chance to read the report yet. Have you done your homework? That is always the question. If not, don't worry. Links will be shared in the comments so you can grab your copy during today's show. We want to hear from you. That means reactions to what we're talking about, your own comments and ideas, downloading the resource again so you can check it out for yourself, and of course, feedback. We're always looking to improve, so do let us know what you want from us and from Thirst more generally. So the survey itself. Sent to more than 3,700 learning and development professionals. That is a huge base of experience to draw from, all over the planet, and then drawing from secondary sources like Deloitte and LinkedIn, who are also obviously doing fantastic insight and research. The question we want to kick things off with then is actually slightly different to this. Rather than asking you for the top 3 challenges, because that's kind of our thing, what do you think the top challenges for L&D in 2026? Think about your own organization, your own team, and let us know in the comments. And to kick things off then, Fred, if you're thinking about, from your perspective, the top challenge for 2026, where are you at the minute? What do you think it might be?
It's tough to not be influenced because I've read the report and I kind of know what the actual the challenges actually naturally are. I think what's going to be interesting as we go through this discussion, I think, is that the challenges remain very similar to previous years, and obviously the landscape's changing in terms of technology and tooling. But I think in essence, it always boils down to return of investment, and I think this is just more applicable given how tight, SMB budgets typically are, and as we'll find out, remain so. So I think it's the case of everybody is running into the newest ways to L&D. I think always does this. We always have a new kind of trend, something that's kind of interesting to run into. But ultimately, it always maps and boils down to, can I see the return of that investment, and how does that actually benefit the business at the bottom line? So I think the challenges remain the same. I think they're ROI and budgetary in my eyes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been chatting with a lot of people recently about sort of what's changed and what hasn't. I think there's a general view of everything has changed, and yet kind of nothing has changed. The problems are in many ways the same as they've always been, but they feel different, I think, because of the velocity and volume of change in the kind of contributing factors. ROI is the challenge, maybe demonstrating ROI and impact is the challenge, but maybe now we're being asked for that quicker or in more areas, or we're being challenged to demonstrate it in more robust ways, which is a really interesting to how we tend to say that the challenge is fundamentally different rather than just sort of acknowledging that the same but different, if you will.
Yeah, indeed, and actually, just reading the comment that's come up there on screen
Yeah.
from Nathan Dring about it's basically the gold rush for AI that's actually making it even harder to explain and demonstrate the value. And it's pretty much just what you said there, Tom. It's kind of like the way that everything's moving and how fast it's moving is meaning everybody is struggling with the pace of just their even everyday lives, as it were. But businesses are investing in things that are completely different than they were previously, and there's competing elements to that budget, but also there's more demands on the delivery to be more expedient than they were before.
Yes.
And I find it really interesting about how it's what we're now chasing has almost changed. So I think if we kind of head back a few years, we were all doing skill frameworks, and if we head back a few more years, that it would have been learning the flow of work. And now it's very much AI driven and that side of it. And I think almost we never get to complete anything almost. We kind of like, as soon as we're chasing something, we chase something else. We sort of get distracted again and move on. But the challenges really remain the same.
I think it's fascinating how, alongside that, at conferences, I've seen the rise of more people talking about these almost product management esque conversations around the life cycle of an L&D initiative and sunsetting ideas and how we never finish anything, and how do we get to the point where maybe we're not ever going to reach perfect completion on every project, but how can we make sure we're leaving each thing in a good place? And maybe fundamentally changing how we think about, rather than initiatives being start, in progress and complete, how do we launch things that can be left as they are, or we can come back to later and expand as necessary, really thinking in that, I always hesitate to say we need to be more agile because, I think everyone's tired of being told that for the last 20 years. But it still is kind of the right term in that sense. It's working in those smaller pieces. It's that flexibility and the ability to adapt to change, because it's only going to get more ferocious over time, it seems.
Indeed, but also if we think about that in terms of imagining your L&D budgets are not a problem, and you've got all the greatest tooling and everything, and you can implement everything you want to or dream about. You've then got to be delivering L&D that's applicable for the people who are on the front line, who their world is changing as quick as it is changing, and their skills are changing that fast. So how do you, even with unlimited budgets and everything else, how do you actually kind of keep up with that side of it? So there's definitely a new set of challenges, but ultimately, the same thing still, I think, underpin a lot of it, which is where we come back to ROI and ultimately making sure that L&D has an actual impact and a difference within the business.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the first kind of finding of the report. Flat investment and rising pressure. Everyone will be astonished by this fact, obviously. But actually, in a lot of conversations about this, we tend to say, "Oh, it feels like." And actually, it's really important to have the data to say, no, this isn't just feels like. This is a real thing. This can be measured. It can be seen across organizations. Interestingly, a lot of people say too recently, so it feels like we've got so much less money that the budget has shrunk. And in actual fact, this suggests to us that that's not the case. Broadly speaking, there will be, there's the 9.8%, and there will be outliers, of course. But we see that for most of us, the question, do you expect your L&D budget to increase, decrease, or remain the same? The vast majority expect their budget to remain the same. A few very lucky people expect an increase. Expectation and reality might align, who knows? I'm always expecting an increase in my budget, but not everyone tends to agree with me. Same with the decrease, right? So when you're looking at this, there's kind of a number of ways to take this, right? If budgets are remaining the same, I think there's a strong argument to say that's pretty good in the current world. There was a big risk of a big drop, and we're hopefully not seeing that. But what are your kind of immediate takeaways from the idea of, look, we know that the pressure is rising, that there's more change, that there is more demand on L&D, but budgets are staying the same. So what does that mean in your mind?
I think there's a few things that spring to mind on this. I think what I probably find more interesting this time is L&D budgets have always had this kind of pressure on them, but I actually think this is not unique this time to the L&D space within an organisation. I think the budgets now are being reallocated to a lot more different areas are competing for that with the state and the speed of change that we're talking about. So even if you are just spending it in different areas, if you're a software developer, all of a sudden budgets for people is being moved to AI tooling in order to produce it faster and more automated. And ultimately budgets, what you had before and how you could spend them, are changing across the board, not just in L&D. but the key bit for me, I think, is be having a reduced budget or a budget remaining the same doesn't mean you need less learning on or less sort of commitment to these causes. You just effectively need better bets. You need to be focused more. You need to be a lot more stringent about what's working and what isn't working. You need to be more precise on how you're applying that budget. It's no longer applicable that you can have 27 initiatives and just in case you've got to effectively act on what you're seeing metrics wise as fast as you can and effectively just change your operations and change where your spend is. And I think that it's quite easy to blame budgets, I think, in a lot of cases. And I think if you have been a long-standing L&D working in the sector for a while, I think you'll get used to this just being almost the norm, and you've had to work around this anyway. But I think we almost need to remove that as a real problem and say, well, okay, we have this budget. How do we work with this a bit more applicably? Throwing that back to you, Tom, kind of, if budgets aren't rising, what would you stop doing off the top of your head, kind of in L&D, that could allow you to kind of keep the budget low but protect the impact of L&D?
I think, and I just noticed we have got a comment from JD, a question from JD Dillon in the thingies, but it was about how budgets are allocated. I do have an answer to your question, but I thought what you were saying about allocation there kind of touched on this really well. I don't want to miss it because it's a great question. So if budgets remain the same, how are they being allocated? I was at a conference yesterday. And I was chatting to some people about it was a conversation about AI really, but we kind of broadened out to technology, and their organizations had a new set of rules about how they were to spend their budget. 20% of all new expenditure had to be aligned to some kind of AI initiative. And I honestly, even now, having thought about it overnight, I still don't quite know how I feel about that. Because I kind of feel that there is a danger there of minimum spend on tools that are not necessarily right. If you're being pushed to spend the budget, if there is that pressure to, I'm always nervous about that. But I'm also then thinking in organizations that might be resistant to change, trying new things, rolling with, being this more adaptable world that we all need to get used to. Is this the push that they need to say, hey, if you don't spend this 20% of your budget on AI aligned projects, you're going to lose it? Will that be the kick that they need to be, okay, let's give this a go? And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, and then I'll answer your question afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a similar thing, and I've seen it talked about as well in terms of, but I've actually seen it being allocated as a separate budget entirely, so that if you think about the budgets across the whole organization, the reason why L&D's budget as a whole is remaining the same or reducing is primarily because a good part of the whole collective budget has now been assigned to 10-20% of it, and it's becoming an AI tool. And then controversially against that as well is that you can actually have a challenge around actually correct spend on AI, because everyone's running at that so fast as well that actually you're not metricizing the value of return on spend on the AI tools as well. But yeah, we're certainly seeing that. There's another comment again from Nathan in our thread who's stating, there you go. They think that L&D folk have a slight defense up, and also so that it can be that actually we're not ruthless enough in assessing the suitability of their own content deficit. So I think that's a really accurate point, that I think the defense up has been a long-standing form of an L&D community. And actually, these pushes around AI budgets that have been allocated just focus us in on saying, well, we need to actually make sure whatever we're implementing is actually driving, real differences within the business.
Yeah. And interestingly, actually, Nathan's comment kind of aligns with my answer to your question, which I think we should. I don't know if there's universally any one thing I would cut, but what I would do is spend time as a team ensuring that I could define and articulate the metric and value chain from every initiative to a business objective, and wherever I couldn't, I would seriously consider swinging the axe unless there was a truly monstrous reason why not. Sometimes that monstrous reason is it's the CEO's pet project, and if you kill it, you're next. That's just real world politics sometimes, but that is a marginal reason. That is getting less and less the case, I think, in most organizations, because even the projects that your favorite or least favorite senior leader loves, if they aren't delivering value, I think there's an increasing awareness that it has to go. I think we do. I think to your point, we are far too defensive of our own work. We have to be much more willing to be critical. I mentioned kind of that product thinking. We need to assume that everything we create will at some point be sunset. Nothing is permanent. No one purchase, no piece of content, no course, no initiative, whatever it is, it will have a best before date on it. It should have it. We have it on food. I always think training is a bit like milk. It's absolutely fantastic until all of a sudden it's not. It's really good for you until suddenly it puts you in the hospital. It does the same thing to our skills ecosystem. The training works great for however long, but when it's no longer allowing your people to perform, it is the bad milk of your catalog, and you need to chuck it in the bin.
Yeah. Sort of oddly on that point, Tom, as well, it's
Yeah.
connected, not entirely the same point, but connected. I think it was McKinsey, the company McKinsey, I think, was basically set up to deliberately ensure that it would move members of its team on. You would almost outgrow the business deliberately, and they would deliberately set up to be a feeder organization for other organizations, and that's how they would kind of do that. And it's a similar sort of, once you switch your mindset in the same way you just mentioned, that actually, things that we will move on from this, and you will replace the strategies and do different tooling, etc., then you get very different results, and ultimately them setting up to say, well, we're not trying to retain everybody till the end of time. We're actually going to get fresher, newer ideas by new people coming to the business, and that actually helps us. It's kind of the same mentality here. It's like, okay, we can use this approach or this strategy for L&D today, but we're not wedded to this tomorrow. It can be something different, and we can move on.
Absolutely. I think there's a really good point here from Peter about that kind of balance. So I think there's a place for both human and AI learning. They complement each other, particularly AI and avatars in nano learning lessons. So I think there's it's a potentially interesting tension, isn't it? That I think there's a tendency at the minute for every conversation. It happened kind of what I was talking about, for it to be AI. The pressure here must be AI. Budgets are staying the same, and AI is the obvious thing, and it is part of the conversation. It's a big part of the conversation, but I think notably, AI is not a lot of what we currently do. Like most L&D budgets is not AI related, and that may change over time, of course. But I mean, in any given budget, the biggest cost is people. Excluding some really like odd budgets, but 9 times out of 10 it's people. And some people disagree with me, but I've not seen vast waves of human replacement in the L&D space yet. That's not to say it can't happen. That's not to say it hasn't happened in other areas, but I would say 8-9 months ago, there was, when I spoke to people at events, like this absolute cast iron belief that by the end of the year we would all be gone. That there'd be waves of instructional designers and trainers out on the streets looking for new work, and it's not really materialized. So I think it's definitely a partnership piece. I guess to agree with Peter and sort of what Nathan's saying as well.
Yeah, I think it probably leads us on quite nicely into the next slide, where we're talking a little bit around AI assisted L&D and how the top use cases are here. So it kind of falls onto your point there, Tom, doesn't it? So go on.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. I mean, let's dive into this. I don't think, again, it will surprise anyone to see content creation as the top response for an AI use case. What made me very happy was actually that second place was analytics, which I think is what a lot of people were hoping to see. I think if we'd have asked this question a year and a half ago, analytics might have been a lot lower, and it was in a lot of early reports. Then we've got quizzes and knowledge checks. We've got personalization and recommendation, skills mapping and assessment, interestingly low, given our, I don't want to use the word obsession with skills in our industry, but we do like to talk about skills quite a lot. And they're important. There's a good reason for that, to be clear. Admin automation, Content curation, I thought surprisingly low given the penchant for creating new content being right at the top. And then learning support, so chatbots and coaching right at the bottom. And just before we dive into specific points, in terms of those things in that order, anything that surprised you, or was it pretty much what you were expecting, Fred?
When we caught up beforehand about this and we were talking about it, we kind of shared the same delight that analytics was higher up because that's where we're seeing a lot of the value of this. I think the same sort of surprise around skills mapping. I mean, it's not totally low. It's still sort of hovering around 40% of people, using it for that case. But I think with its prominence of being, it was becoming so important, and it was almost just the pre-AI world. It was everybody's on a topic on everyone's lips, as it were, in L&D, and then it's almost just been replaced. And I think it's something that we need to be aware of when we are, again, it's this budget thing, when we're chasing these kind of new technologies, new approaches, etc., that we don't leave behind real, actual, useful approaches and strategies, which skills mapping has proven out, really successful for people who've implemented it into place. So yeah, nothing too surprising. I think the content creation piece is I understand why it's so high, and I understand, we get asked for it at first as well, and it is primary and key. But I think you, in particular, Tom, actually raised that. I think you did a blog article on our report, and I think you were actually talking about the fact that the content to course kind of creation, we were all talking about that like that was a problem, and that really wasn't ever really the problem. It was still around the engagement and driving that home, and then mapping that back to actual objectives and change effectively. And I think there's a risk, like we all sit on LinkedIn and there's a lot of noise from the AI slop that's out there, but you bring that into L&D and you've got that real risk that actually, yeah, you're populating stuff quicker, you're creating content quicker, but actually it's even less impactful. And that was probably one of our biggest challenges previously. And now we're doing it faster and making it worse. So I am really cautious around that as a use case. I find it is just, it feels great when you're doing it, but actually the reality I'm starting to feel is probably that it's actually almost the worst thing we could be doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic example of we get a new technology and the first thing we want to do is what we've always done. We feel like we're innovating, but in actual fact, we are just taking a new technology and forcing it to scale what we already identified not only didn't work, but was an active problem. Like before the kind of Gen AI boom, we had a couple of years of this now. We were kind of bringing ourselves round to this idea that maybe content isn't the answer to every one of our problems. Maybe a course is not always the solution. We appear to have parked that idea the minute we were told, look how quickly you can make stuff. Not entirely. This is a generalization for effect on a webinar, of course. But the point is that I think what really surprised me was how comparatively low compared to content creation, curation was. Because again, curation was gaining a lot of momentum for a little while. This idea of actually there's a phenomenal amount of resource within your organization, whether it's knowledge bases, whether it's people sort of user generated content, whether it's the existing content base that you've got, whatever it might be, but people can't find it or they can't get to it where and when they need it. And then the learning support, the idea of putting these exciting new tools in the hands of the end user. And to me, those two kind of go hand in hand because they are the ones that empower the end user. Content creation, at least in theory, empowers us. And I think there's an interesting power dynamic there that we need to be quite brave and say, why is it that we have run headfirst into empowering ourselves rather than the people who, if we were asked, who do we empower? We would go, oh, the end user in the organization. Always, we're here to help them. We're a servant enterprise. Yet our action suggests otherwise when it comes to our adoption of AI. So I think that there's an interesting kind of tension there that we need to explore.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think content curation, I've got a use case example when I was speaking to somebody recently about this. And you can kind of think about content curation in many different ways. But one example of how AI was helping was there was, for instance, like someone in the world is struggling with some part of their process, some part of their job role, and was needing almost guidance on how to navigate it, like in order to get the best results. The content curation piece was actually used as a contextualized search for resources that actually could deliver the guidance, the information, the upskilling, whatever it might be. So, for instance, if you were Googling something similar, so let's say you're a software developer again, because this is close to my heart from software development standpoint. But if you're a software developer and you're struggling to kind of speak up or provide value in any kind of peer reviews that you're doing of people in your organization's code base or something similar like that, you can actually there's lots of articles online that actually tell you how best to approach code review, what your kind of rules should be, kind of how to think about it, so you can frame it differently, so you can kind of have the confidence to do these things, etc. And ultimately, you can contextualize that question into an AI tool. Because if you just search that on Google, it'll come up with some results, but it's not quite right. But you can actually say, we have this scenario where this person's doing this and they have these challenges, and it's going to then feed you back actual content. And then you have to use the manual element. You have to use that part of, okay, I'm going to look at this myself as a subject matter expert and say, is this applicable? Do I agree with this training? Do I agree with this learning? Do I agree with this information, this opinion? And then provided you do, you can then feed that in. And that's a form of content curation. It's not creation because the content already exists. And you could have sort of done this before with search, but it's now so personalized, again, halfway up that list to the exact use case of people or job roles in your organization. That just gives you a very different power. And there for me are the great use cases of technology, where actually we're not just throwing things out there as quick as possible. We're actually really using it as an accelerant on our day to day.
Well, this is it again. It's flipping that question around. Whereas if content curation is doing what we've always done, but quicker and at scale, that's saying, what are the problems that we've always struggled to really solve? And does this technology unlock the opportunity for us to finally do that? And I think that is where all the really exciting potential, I think, for Gen AI sits right now. We do have some more on this. So let's hop on to the next one, which is, how confident are you AI is helping improve learner outcomes? I found this data, and I'll be interested to see what everyone thinks of it, refreshingly honest, very middling. Effectively, we don't really know. Which I think is I would be very concerned if like it had been like a strongly yes answer. My follow-up would have been, okay, can you prove it? Because I'm not sure. And I'm glad it's not too low, I must admit. One would be like, then why are we spending money on it? So if we're not sure if it's improving learner outcomes, I want to ask a slightly different question based on this data to you, Fred, and I'd be interested to see what everyone in the comments says as well. Is improving learning outcomes what we're going to end up wanting to use Gen AI for? Is that the point?
I mean, that's currently what we're really targeting it for, but I think we're probably slightly misplaced in terms of targeting it. Like we said, when we said the high focus is on content creation and not necessarily focusing on the analytics side, because actually you can still answer that question with a yes. The generative AI can still be to make sure that we get the learner outcomes that we want, but actually we can do that by making sure we analyze the data in a way that we couldn't do before, because generative AI will allow us to take multiple data sources, ask it really specific English questions, and actually get answers back that are really precise. So I think it is still probably quite key, but I think how we are potentially addressing this is maybe different. I think picking up on this graph and chart, and like you said here, is, it's kind of a normal stage here. Is we are in it's promising but not proven kind of phase. It's everyone's experimenting with it. You can see some wins, but we're struggling to kind of measure it as well, because it's moving quite fast as well in that regard. So it makes it quite difficult. And I wanted to add at this point as well, just because I thought this was quite interesting. We're really close. I'm really close to AI, and I do a lot of investigation. I'm trying to stay up with every single trend, and it feels like a treadmill. You can't quite ever catch up with it, and you're always feeling behind. And I watched, there was a podcast from the guys over at HubSpot who do they're basically just doing a lot of AI content all the time. And there's pretty much every day or so, they've got a new thing, a new tool you want to use. And And they said themselves that they actually feel that they're constantly behind and they can't quite keep up with the tooling that's there. And they feel like they have to put more hours in, more time, try more tools constantly. And these are the guys who are, that's all they do all day. You know, that's what their webinar is all focused about. And they feel behind. So it is no surprise to me that when you look at this, that we're not quite sure, we're not that confident the AI outcomes are there because we're not quite sure the tools are right and we're experimenting with all the different ideas. I guess the bottom line from all of that for me is don't worry about it. Keep the same focus in your mind about in terms of it's all about that return. It's all about providing the better outcomes that L&D always aims to make. And if you can move fast, great. But also if you can make decisions faster based upon the analysis that you're getting, ultimately we'll arrive, you know, with the right tooling at some point or the right tool set. So yeah, I do hope it slows down, is what I would say, Tom. But yeah, how are you finding it used? How are you kind of finding to the people you talk to the AI tooling that seems to be having the most impact and value returning for the L&D space?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think part of this will be selection bias because obviously I spend a lot of time working with organizations who want to embrace like experiment-led design and practice. So they're inherently quite, we don't know and we're entirely comfortable not knowing. That's the point. So again, they would kind of land in this middle of the, you know, we don't know yet. I think the things that they are most seeing value in actually is when they are putting tools in the hands of end users. So real simple story. I worked with a company recently who fit tires. Very exciting, as you can imagine. They you know, it's a very different kind of organization. No one there was just like, I just love tires. I'm so passionate about tires. But you know what? They did love what they did. They loved who they worked with. They loved the people. They were all people. They loved the environment of working in garages and talking to customers and talking with other mechanics. And so the idea of here's your AI coworker. So they'd previously had one of those AI coworker conversations. They were just like, nope, we don't want this. I don't want a robot in the workplace. I'm all about people. But what we did was work with them in like a hackathon with not with the L&D team, not with the senior leadership, but with people who work in garages, the customer service reps on the desk and mechanics. And we put tools like Claude and Lovable.dev in their hands and said, let's see if we can come up with something that's going to help you do your job. And what we came up with was they created for themselves their own little internal application that allowed them to share top tips or fun moments between garages. Linking up, hey, I've never seen this kind of a locking nut before on this cool type of car, or oh, we're changing a tire that's a little bit different, or this puncture came in and it was unusual. Really, like very niche stuff. But for the first time, they engaged with AI in a really positive way. Now, whether or not that will have a positive impact on long-term learning outcomes, we don't know specifically yet. It's too soon. This only happened November last year. But we're going to keep checking in. And if it does, it would make sense because ultimately all we've done is allowed them to use AI to enable peer-to-peer sharing, which generally speaking, we would agree is a good opportunity to learn from each other. But they've managed to do this and also gain a level of comfort with a new form of technology. And maybe at the minute, that's their only interaction with it. But they will now have the comfort level to not immediately resist future uses of AI, which is probably the more exciting thing there. I think so often in these organizations, AI is this big, scary external force that's coming in to change everything. And this basically did the simple thing of saying, no, it's a piece of technology. You are in control of it. I think that's really important right now.
I think moving away from the AI side of that, the point you made around the the example of the Thai company there, one of the main things there, you're talking about social learning, but you're also talking about that knowledge that's in your co-workers' heads and just the ability to share that tacit knowledge without kind of realizing they're doing so. They're just, hey, I've got this, I've seen this, and it just builds that information. Historically, and we're better in SMBs just primarily because it's easy to implement and less scary, but we're primarily a little bit scared of handing any form of keys or control over to the employees, the team members, the learners, effectively, because of fear of what they're going to do and what they're going to say. And it's an odd one, because actually, studies have generally shown that that kind of knowledge is, you learn the best from your co-workers, and you learn some really niche elements that you would never have got anywhere else. You can't simply just distill that into a course. But actually, there's a lot of fear around that approach. So if nothing else, that AI tooling is just effectively unlocked an age-old kind of way of actually building in training into the business, but done it in a way that didn't feel the same. So I think that's it's really nice.
Yeah, and it goes back to that whole argument of, if you trust your people so little, why did you hire them? Is so often the conversation I have. Like, clearly you let them work in your business day in, day out. Why do you assume that the minute they have this technology, they're going to misbehave? And it's usually they go, oh yeah, hang on a minute. We trust them with money and our customers and our equipment. What are we worried about? It just requires a little bit of pushback.
I've had many conversations very similar.
Yeah. So let's move into talking about expectations and challenges. So we asked at the start what you all thought the biggest challenge facing L&D was, or in your world in 2026. In terms of the survey, a winner by quite some margin, proving ROI and measuring impact, followed by lack of time and learner engagement. Then we have a bit of a drop off to the next pack of data points there. So let's just talk about those top three for a moment. We've already talked about ROI, improving impact, quite a lot, but I think it is worth spending some time on, because it's apparently the biggest challenge, and I don't think I disagree. When you talk about measurement, impact, ROI, Fred, what sort of things are you seeing that businesses actually expect from L&D? Because I think we often view it as from a, how do we prove ourselves upward? But, as a business leader yourself, what are the things that you're actually looking for?
I think when the viewpoint a lot of times within the business is it's a means to an end. If you're putting an L&D function in, it almost becomes this, okay, we have to do that to show evidence that we've done some compliance, we've done our ISO training, we've hit these kind of requirements within the business, and they're less driven by, well, actually, how we see meaningful impacts within the business. And I always keep pinning this back down to, you always need to speak into the words that the C-suite of any business can understand. And effectively that becomes down to reducing costs or increasing profits, or kind of a combination of both. I've just seen in Nathan's company, I know in my early years I didn't get up to support because I didn't speak the language of the boardroom. I taught learning growth development, but that wasn't the language of ops and finance. L&D has to speak the language of the top table and present at it. Yeah, that's basically exactly the same as what we kind of mentioning here. And I think you can start to prove out ROI by just mapping that back to something that actually is beneficial to the bottom line of the business. And this can be, take an example of staff retention, for instance. Effectively, you can say, well, since we put these programs in place, people are happy with the business. Ultimately, we were losing X amount of people per year or per month when they're losing only Y. That actually has a direct cost, not only in terms of the loss of time to train a new person up and the loss to the business, there's a direct cost quite a lot of times in terms of recruitment. You can actually map that back. Quite often there's even a recruitment fee associated with the person who's found the person, and you can quite easily just even map that to that number and say, well, that's actually saved us X amount of thousands of pounds, based upon that one metric. And that really drives home to CFO or CEO along the lines. So I think we're in L&D always focused on ROI around things like vanity metrics or comfort metrics like completions. Hey, they've completed this. Hey, they've logged in. We've seen them all. Our system's great because more people are on it than ever before. Yeah, but what's the end result? What actually we see in a benefit to the business? And I think the more you can think of in that mindset of who your audience actually is, what they see ROI as, it helps us focus and narrow that metric down a little bit more.
Absolutely. And it's not usually a single step, right? It's very difficult to say, oh, we did this training and therefore we made an extra 3 million quid this year or whatever. But I would say it's about these kind of correlation based value chains. We did this and that linked to the following things. We know from whatever over here, these are likely causes of this, which caused that, which led to an increase in sales. We were part of this, not, L&D did not make an extra 3 million quid this year, which I think is often when we talk about impact, I mean, I talk about it with L&D people, they're often looking to go, oh, so how can I prove that that was us? It's like sometimes we don't, in fact, almost never do we get to be that certain. We usually have to be part of the overall effort, right? We spend our time enabling others. So generally it's we're part of. But I don't think there's an expectation, again, thinking about kind of language of the board and expectations. I've never met a CEO or a CFO who's like, no, I expect my L&D team to claim absolute control over business outputs. It's contribution to. I think, yeah, really good point from Nathan. L&D is correlation, not causation, and often it's a lagging, not a leading metric. 100%. That's exactly what those chains are. They're a series of leading to lagging metrics, all based on correlation. Amazing. So lack of time. Lack of time as a challenge is interesting because we certainly can't make more time, at least not in real terms. What are your thoughts, Fred? Well, first of all, what do you think that actually looks like within these small and medium organizations that you see? And is there a fix, or is this just something that we have to, for want of a better word, kind of get used to and just accept that is going to be there?
Humans in general are great, aren't they, at just populating the day with whatever anyway, and always feeling busy. And I always say it's a relative metric, the concept of feeling busy, because everybody always thinks they're the busiest, and you never quite know who is actually technically the busiest. Everyone just feels they'll max themselves out, don't they? And lack of time is kind of a semi synonym of that. I think it's very real though in SMBs, primarily because normally if you are an L&D function in an SMB, you're probably the only person in the organization who does that at all. And ultimately, you've only got so many hours in the day to do anything. You haven't got this team of people. And if you've just got to create one piece of learning or whatever, that's ultimately the only thing you can do that day. And that's why the lack of time then is really, really true. I think that's what it looks like. I think how you can improve on that, I always love, and we've talked about it before, I'll try and not mention the air word again for the 100th time, but leaning on the technologies are always really key here, because you can curate the data sources quicker, you can analyze the data sets and the metrics faster than ever before. If you can do that, you can ultimately make decisions quicker about what is working and what isn't working, so you don't waste your time on things that aren't, and you can kind of apply it more applicably. And I think the opportunities we have now based upon that is almost that's completely different to what we had previously. And we're only talking like 3 years ago. You just simply didn't have these tools available to you, and even probably a year ago they weren't as good as they were. So actually, I often think about this the other way around, that people are panicking in fear of this, but actually the opportunities are so much greater to take away that kind of that grunt work, or do things that weren't simply possible in the time period you had before to do, and then ultimately start to use your time that you then have got to really deliver impact in a different way. I think regardless, people will always feel a lack of time though, no matter how big your organization or small. And I think you do generally tend to fill it, but I think it's more about the placement and, accuracy of the time you do spend, where you spend it, and providing more value on the time that you spend.
Yeah, I think this, and again, to me, this is an example of, this is not a new problem. I've never known anyone that works in L&D, or to be honest, anyone in general, to go, oh yeah, I've got plenty of time. Yeah, sure, I've got no issue. But I do think there is a greater awareness now of needing to not waste time, because I think historically we've been quite self-indulgent sometimes. I still occasionally work in organizations that just want to go, oh, well, a piece of e-learning will take about 4 weeks to create. And we kind of have to have a very serious chat about it. It's been 20 years. You can't still be using those kinds of timelines. The world is a different place now. There is no longer an accepting reaction to those kinds of timelines when all we're doing is creating a 5-minute whatever in your favorite authoring tool. I think certainly we've gone through this at Evolve, is we took a very close look last year at how do we spend our time, and what's valuable and what is necessary but not valuable. And if it's necessary but not valuable, how can we make it someone else's problem? And that someone else might be someone outsourced, or it might be a technology. It might be an AI or a different whatever type of technology. Doesn't really matter. For me, that was calendar management. Not really an AI problem, but my goodness, it ate up my time. And the time that managing my calendar was taking, I can now be designing a workshop or delivering a workshop or consulting with a business or whatever it might be.
Yeah, your reference then to something that's actually not even, particularly an L&D thing, but actually just removes that time was where my mind was going. We love a tool, which is a presentation tool called Gamma, which is basically like a PowerPoint, but it's you put the AI instructions in to do it. You can feed it all the info and it will give you a PowerPoint deck. We talked about ROI before and proving that out to the C-suite. It's quite often the case where you have to be presenting the data and the metrics and doing that sort of every month or every quarter back. Now, that alone could take you a day or two to actually produce that slide deck with all the right information in that and the charts and sort of prove that out. You can now do that in a tool. There are other tools available, of course, but you do that in a tool like Gamma. You can drop in all your data sets and say, this is my audience. This is what I'm trying to demonstrate. And it will produce that for you. And you've suddenly taken that 2 days down to probably an hour, maybe less in terms of that. And that's your time back. And that's what we're talking about here. It's not necessarily just like course creation. It's how else you can use all these tools that affect your day to day. And if you're not, then someone else is. The next person in L&D is, and they're getting the bigger wins. They're getting their time back, and they're going to move forward faster than you are as well. So there's you've got to just be looking at anything in your space that you do on a daily that actually takes an abnormal amount of time realistically to achieve. We're not trying to solve things that only take 5 minutes and make them take a minute. We're trying to take things that take multiple hours or days and reduce them down. And that's where you'll get that time back. And it's nice to think about it not just in L&D sort of provision almost.
Absolutely. So the last one of these challenges then, learner engagement. I will forego my usual rant about the conversation of learner engagement. We only have 10 minutes left and I can never put it into that time. So this feels like a forever challenge. It comes up pretty much every survey. It always scores highly. We don't really have a particularly good shared definition of what engagement is, so I'm always interested to hear from other people. Let us know in the comments if this is a problem for you. Would you say that there is a learner engagement challenge in your organization? And Fred, when people come to you and say, we have a learner engagement challenge, what sort of on-the-ground problems are you actually seeing in those organizations that relate to this?
I always think it just comes down to the fact that, generally speaking, the vast majority of people in organizations are not they do not embrace, learning, development, training platforms and everything else associated as much as you do in your role. So when you're judging them based upon your enthusiasm and engagement versus theirs, it's always going to look like you're not quite delivering. But ultimately, you've got to make sure you are, the learner engagement is successful if they are actually starting to consume the information that's made available to them and actually starting to make a difference. And you're seeing people use different toolings or different approaches or processes within their job role because of the training that you've put in place. So I think learner engagement is, like, to your point, and you said you wouldn't get into the rant, but it is almost a misnomer of what we're chasing often. But I think the common fault of engagement in general is we just make it a little bit too mundane and difficult to access the information in general. So when you're talking about the chatbot idea and also the tire example, you've actually switched out engagement there for it. It's naturally now engaging to the person because you built the place that they store that location, share that location is driven for them by them, and rather than being pushed to them in a certain way. And I think that's how you can kind of think about it. Nathan's comment on here, we can't engage learners. We need to make content resources attractive enough for people to choose to engage. I would agree, but I would also say, if you make content that looks fantastic and resources that are attractive enough, if you're still not meeting them where they need it to be at the times, it'll still not necessarily resonate as often. And unfortunately, the bits that work really well is all that kind of like the social side, social metrics and FOMOs and things like that. And you can employ these kind of psychological tactics into it. Well, actually, your tire example is that, I think, Tom. It's almost like it's a social network, realistically, that's kind of in the cloak of an L&D sort of thing almost. But again, that content is probably really simple in terms of it's not actually, you haven't made great content there, but what you've done is you delivered it, or the people are delivering it to themselves in a way that really matches and hits the engagement point of that type of learner. And I guess lastly on that, there's not a one size fits all for how learners are engaged. I'm very confident the people in that tyre shop will be very differently engaged than someone who might be in a estate agent or an accountancy firm or something similar.
Hannah, on exactly that point, it's all about making it relevant. And I think pretty much, I think, yeah, Nathan, I think your use of the word attractive there, you're spot on. It means it's helpful. It's, that. But I think there is a problem. We have historically had a problem in our industry of let's make it look good. This is where all our jokes about, hey, could you jazz up those slides or, add a cartoon character or whatever it might be when it comes to the world of content. We've kind of, we've trapped ourselves there often in linking learner engagement to how impressive does something look rather than how relevant, how useful, and how readily available is this. Again, going back to that world of basic user experience design, right? Is it useful? Is it usable? Is it desirable? The two are the function of the last. I'm aware we're coming to the end, and I wanted to just get a quick snapshot of this one, which is leadership as a priority, leadership development, the leading priority in small and medium organizations, closely followed by closing skills gaps, which to me makes me want to go back to that AI slide where we'd ranked skills so relatively lowly and go, I'm sorry, what? This is but let's not do that because we only have a few minutes. I would like your thoughts, Fred, on leadership development, and why you think it is that the respondents to the survey rated it as the top priority in 2026.
I love this that it is, because I think it's still, ignore everything that we've said in terms of the technology and all these things. I think it is just primarily a really key metric on success within a business. There's studies on it. There's a relatively recent one from Gallup where basically they say it's a 70% variance in team engagement by basically having the capability of a manager being different. It can really just deliver, the teams below them can deliver completely different charts off the scale compared by just having leaders who are upskilled and are better than the leaders. So leadership development is the simplest almost of metrics. It's quite difficult obviously to implement, but it's still a key development and a key requirement that we need to do. And it never goes away. You're always still going to have leaders in an organization, so it doesn't matter how you approach it. You've always got that as a need to deliver. I think, I think it's interesting in SMBs though, because I think we can kind of get caught in kind of like these whole leadership programs, these large future leaders sort of things, and we try and mirror what these large enterprise businesses are doing. But I think you almost need to kind of boil it back down. You don't need a future leaders program. You almost need a how do we make Tuesday mornings a bit more efficient kind of program. You need to kind of really boil that back down. And I think, again, if you can break these leadership development pieces into smaller elements that will actually just marginally move the needle of the leaders in your business, I think you can really improve on that L&D side in your organization, see that benefit and see your team deliver as a result of it. So I think SMB just focused probably a little bit too enterprise in their thought process around leadership development.
Yeah, definitely. So ahead of time, looking through these results, we pulled out three things for SMBs to really sort of put at top of their list. Measuring what matters. We've talked about this at quite some extent now. Building adaptable learning ecosystems. The one constant point that we have talked about today is change, the velocity and the volume, and it's not going to stop. And so that adaptability is key. If we continue to build monolithic, brittle systems, they will break. And we have to expect that. And finally, use AI to amplify the human side of L&D. It is fascinating that all through this, AI was a theme that was being brought up, and then leadership development is the top priority. So there is a keen awareness that this technology is a huge unlocker. It has the ability to empower the workforce like never before, but great leadership, human stuff, is still going to really make the difference moving forwards. We would love to welcome your questions or thoughts in the chat to close things out. We do only have a few minutes, but obviously, if there are a wave of questions, we can always come back to them in some posts later on. Let me just see if we've got anything coming in the chat. We've got a great comment here from JD. SMBs rely even more heavily on managers to connect strategy to execution. I think to your point, Fred, there about the focus in that leadership development. I'm quite often critical of leadership development programs. I tend to refer to them as the black hole of the L&D budget. Lots of money poured in, lots of cheese and wine and trips to the south of France to be had, but very little change in the business. I think actually SMBs tend to get it right compared to bigger companies. Because of exactly this. What else have we got? And there is a little need to take leaders off the day job, cannibalize performance. So this is an interesting one, Fred. I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts about kind of on the job leadership and development training.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, with the leaders, because you tend to find that obviously they're very busy on their day to day, and ultimately because they're the way that leaders will generally think. They think if they're not, enabling their teams to operate and removing the bottlenecks, etc., then they're not succeeding. So in order to take them away from that day to day is where it gets really difficult. It's a challenging one to really meet them in the place. I mean, what have you seen, Tom? I've not seen too many examples of it done really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. Where I have seen on the job leadership development work is when it's been it's had a strong foundational point. So for instance, I've seen kind of book club driven development programs where they'll be like, we're going to read a management book, The 1 Minute Manager. It's the first management book I could think of, and we're going to discuss it. We're going to discuss it at the weekly managers meeting once every meeting. We meet every week, whatever it might be, so on and so forth. But that only really works if you've got the right group of managers who are aligned with the same issues. I think it is difficult, but I'm convinced it can be done. Again, my critique of leadership development largely comes from the fact of, I think, whether it's on the job or not, I think most leadership development programs fail to deliver what they promise to the organization. Controversial performance is often emotional, not logical. Is it fair to say that often training which imparts or reinforces logic is therefore a waste of time and money?
Nathan brought the mic drop at the end.
I would challenge the premise. I don't think performance is often, well, it could be impacted by emotional factors, but I don't agree it's more emotional than it is logical. I think that could almost be an entire show in of itself, that one.
We've got our next webinar, I think, there sorted, Tom.
Yeah, this is. I think it would depend on how you define training, how you define performance. Yeah, there's a lot of it depends in that sentence. Certainly, ineffective training is a waste of time and money. I think we can all agree on that. Fantastic. Well, we are coming up to the end of our time. And I think we'll probably have to share some answers to that last question at some point after this. Bear with us, Nathan, on that one. It's too big for the last minute. Fred, I want to say thank you so much for your time joining us today, going through this report, of course, putting it out in the first place and sharing your insights. And just to remind everyone that you can grab your copy. We're going to drop a link into the comments. There's also a link in the description of today's webinar where you can download this, review it yourself, and really think about how this might apply to your business. It's never just a straight piece of application. We know it's adopt and adapt, so please do take the time to do that. Fred, any closing thoughts from you just as we round up our time together?
Just to probably add, the L&D report that we've got there has got a lot of the more data-driven points that we made today in it, but it also has some sort of actual playbook elements to that as well, like elements that you can actually put into place in your SMB at this point to actually make the difference. So it's always worth it, even if the statistics are not necessarily as important to you. There's actually some useful kind of tidbits in there that might benefit you as a business as well. So I definitely recommend taking a look.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. Thank you for joining us, Fred. Thank you all for joining us in the audience and engaging in the chat. And we shall see you next month for the next episode of the L&D Fix.